everyone. Well, good day. This is Dr. Michael Fisher, Fear Talk number 26, a series of conversations, I prefer to call dialogues, on education, life, philosophy, politics, you name it. But there is a circulating pivot, a kernel that is always to be put in the center as far as I'm concerned for this entire series, and that is the topic of fear. And I leave that wide open, folks. So if you think you're already interpreting what you think fear is, think again. It may not be exactly what you think it is or we're taught is. And we will, in this series, explore talking about fear in a really concentrated, nuanced, subtle, well-educated kind of way, and pay attention to how we talk about fear. So I like to record these and then share them with the world, because it is so rare to have somebody actually talking about fear in a self-reflective, critical way. Often we have a lot of opinions. We have a lot of theories we can throw around, but to actually critically self-evaluate our own conversation about fear, that is hard to find. That is rare. That's what I'm trying to do today. And I've got a special guest with me who I'll introduce in a moment. But just to say one word about dialogue or two, I think it's a constantly evolving concept, number one. It is not about arguments per se. It is not about, I agree to disagree with you. Because as soon as we go down that road, we already have we've limited, in a way, we've put up a barrier about the possibilities of co-inquiry. So my friend with me today, my colleague, we are looking at how to co-inquire, and co-inquiry and communities of co-inquiry are very important to our guest, as he will introduce his position on especially working with children. So today is going to be a lot about childhood, about children, about education, about teachers, about education systems. And this guest today has a long, long experience, well, much longer than I do, in actual school systems and working with school teachers. But before we get to that, I think you get the idea. My guest and I are here to explore. We're really going to, if we do this well as dialogue, we should be at the edge of our thinking. We should, in other words, have the fluidity, the comfort, the trust, as much as we are capable, to actually pursue the thinking that is still at the edge of actually being concluded. And that's what I like about a live, living dialogue. It's right at that edge of the unknown, of what I'm not quite sure I'm even saying, but I'm going to say it. And that is where I think is a really interesting edge of learning that we get beyond the more formal, very presentable presentations that are all scripted and very much controlled and meant to deliver what usually we already know, which to me is boring. I can read what we already know we know. So live conversation. Here we are today. I'm going to turn it over to our guest, and then he'll introduce himself. But I asked him, please put down a quote that you think is one of your favorite, and tell us after you give it or before why you chose that quote. So over to you, Arie Kizel in Israel.
Yes. So my name is Arie Kizel, and I'm a professor at the University of Haifa, Israel. And I actually picked a quote from my new book that is going to be published in a few days, actually. So I'm quite thrilled and excited about it. It's talking about shadows and shadowing the light that adults are actually putting on the life of children. So this is the quote that you actually invited from me, my friend Michael. So it's over the years, schools have become systems that overshadow students' narrative, and I guess that also identities. The critical stream within education correctly regards school as microcosmos of society, which is sites that establish, maintain, and reproduce the fundamental principle of social logic. So schools and societies run along the same continuum in the sense that one echoes the other. the shadows that cast over the students, in my view, especially young children's, finds expression in hierarchy and paternalism, schools adopting the same normalizing patterns of injustice and actually enslaving in some ways students and oppressing the weaker groups. So in this way, we can say that it's actually what Paulo Freire, the critical educators from Brazil, calls banking education.
So thank you. We're in the realm, folks, you can hear, of alternative approaches, contradictory approaches, counter education approaches to what we might call normalizing education. And Arie, thank you very much for joining me today, joining us in this conversation. And I want to thank you mostly for writing some of the work that you did in one of your books on philosophy for and with children, an edited volume a couple of years ago, and you wrote a 19-page editorial in that book. So this is about Arie's a specialist. Really, he's been a member and supporter. I think you're one of the head people in that whole movement, particularly in the Mediterranean philosophy with children. And he wrote in that editorial to that anthology, I think one of the most deeply thoughtful interactions of fear in education in a contemporary educator. And that's coming from me having looked at a whole lot of people for a whole lot of decades. And Arie really came out. And of course, I'm pleased that he cited me 6 times or so with different publications that most educators will never repeat and republish. And you actually did. So it's like someone like me who feels in exile from the mainstream education system, even though I have a PhD and I somehow have played the game enough to get that, as have you, to get a PhD in education. It is easy to be exiled. And that's more my perspective. So what's interesting about Arie is that you have stayed within the educational system. Not only have you been a school teacher, I think for 25 plus years, you've been an administrator in the school systems at all grade levels. And then as a professor now training and teaching educators, why would you risk to cite somebody like me who is an exile outside that system? How did you survive? How do you want to just respond to that little bit of intro about you that I gave?
Yes. Actually, I think that we met actually around the expression pedagogy of fear that I wrote about. And as you remember, I thought that pedagogy of fear is actually the establishment, the philosophical establishment of educational system around the world. Actually, it's the basic, it's the bubble, the philosophical bubble that all the system, not just schools, but also administrative, municipalities, states, and so on, are running the system. Now, when we talk about fear, and as you know the best fear, so my colleagues from psychology department, also in the Faculty of Education, are actually talking about anxiety. So this is very misleading. We are talking about pedagogy of fear as a philosophical condition. We can call it like human condition. It's actually the rationale that runs the system, not just the relationship, the space, the curriculum, the hierarchy within the system and around the system. Now, people are objecting to this clarification or this identification.
Who are some of the objectors? Obviously, some mainstream psychologists. And who else? Who else is objecting, do you think?
I think that educators know that many educators around the world, when I speak about it, and I just told you that I came from Krakow in Poland for a lovely conference, joined Turkish and Polish association, and talked about pedagogy of fear, opposed to philosophy with children or pedagogy of searching that we will talk in a moment. So usually people think about fear in a sense of war, about risk, and etc. I mean, they use it in a clinical way, and we are using it, and we are offering the conceptualization of pedagogy of fear, as I think that Paulo Freire is talking about the pedagogy of the oppressed, if we can, import his, let's say, as the concept. Now, fear is in the heart of the rationale of systems. They are actually playing, according to this kind of editorial that you spoke about in our book under Routledge, Philosophy with Children and Teacher Education, 30 lovely pieces of my colleagues from SIG, Special Interest Group in ICPIC, the Association of Philosophy with Children, that I was honored to be 5 years the president. So I spoke about two kinds of discourse. One is the discourse that is actually declared. We are declaring a lot of things, that we love children, that we adore them, that we want their success and so on. And what I call the practice discourse. Actually, this is what runs schools. And I think that in the heart of the philosophy in schools, and we must admit it, and teachers know it around the world, is the fear of being brave enough intellectually sometimes, the fear of speaking out sometimes in the name of something, whatever it is, locally, and sometimes the fear from the principal or the inspector or the parents, or sometimes even the fear from our students. I mean, we are actually afraid of them, what they will say, how they will react. And it's a kind of a prison of concepts. I mean, we are living in a prison of concepts. On the one hand, talking about success and social emotional learning. This is very, new wave today for the last few years. And a lot of mindfulness is coming into school, which is very lovely by itself. But according to my conceptualization, and I think that you will agree with it, actually the pedagogy is run by fear.
Yes, so really just to recap on that, thank you. You could easily just as well said, so you're talking really about an ideological core, is the kind of word I would use, that is surrounding and circulating around an economy, in a way, of fear. An economy and a networking, a social, ecological set of premises, of policies, of philosophies, right? And practices that come down to and surround, like a huge umbrella, like a glass bubble, around what we call education and socialization of children, youth, and us as adults. You could just as well call it fearism, which is a term I called, and as you know, back in 1990, I first came up with that term to try to capture the underbelly, the hidden underbelly, really the shadow of what was being cast as all the attention going to terrorism, especially post 9/11. America, right? North America, but it hit the world where, oh, there's terrorism over there, there's terrorism over there, there's terrorism over there. And I said, oh, that's the perfect strategy of subversion or masking, where you put the enemy out there and you don't look at the underbelly of the dynamics that created a terrorist act, right? In a moment, and that now gets labeled terrorism, and let's put all our attention on that. But of course, they're always over there. It's not over here. It's not what we're breeding. And so fearism was that underbelly construct, much more invisible. And I think very close when you say pedagogy of fear in the way you do. And I think even that language, pedagogy of fear, doesn't quite grab it. It's good, but it just doesn't grab, I think, the essence and richness of what you just said. So I would complement that, and I know you understand that, fearism as an ideological construct that now fear all of a sudden is not just an individual psychological feeling or emotion. And that is nice and safe for the clinical approach and model to both understanding learning, education, behavior. We clinicize it in these very nice categories. Oh, you have a fear of learning. Oh, you have a fear of failing. And all that language and discourse is kind of like the language of terrorism. Oh, it's over there, you see? Oh, you have a problem doing that. Oh, you have a fear of that. And it doesn't look at the systemic, just like with racism, just like classism, sexism. So your notion of pedagogy of fear, I want to make this really clear for viewers, because they may or may not read your stuff, but the concept of what Arie has put together from within inside the education system, remember, I am much more outside of it as a scholar in the way I work. And Arie has put that together from the inside. And then he's got to try now to get funding for his research, convince his colleagues and his graduate students to take his courses. And what is happening when they come and take your courses, your graduate students? What's the courses that you teach, and how does it go over with your teachers and training?
Actually, yesterday I just finished the second semester in my university in Israel around a seminar on master degree on philosophy with children. And I want to elaborate. I think that you actually painted rightfully the big picture. But let's go inside, not just school, but education.
Sounds good.
When you go, this is the end point, the picture that you painted. I want to go to the starting point. When we offer children at home, in the media, but also in schools, answers, and we are not ready to offer them space to ask questions. Actually, this is the first problem that I think that fear is playing the main actor. Question is the most fearful thing that parents, politicians, of course, from either sides, and teachers, they are very afraid of it. So, and in institution, religious, whatever, they are very afraid of it. This is the first thing.
If you can just stop right there, wonderful. In a 2021 talk, you had with a couple colleagues from Brazil who were critical pedagogues. As I listened to your talk, I said, oh, Arie is going to become famous for this statement here. I'm quoting you from that talk, which was a spontaneous conversation you were having with them, more or less. And at one point, they were talking a lot about love in the Freirean radical love concept in pedagogy. And of course, a lot of the humanists are talking about love and education, the new age, the alternatives, some of them, and so on. But Arie said something very important, and I think is right relevant with what you just said about we don't want the children's questions and questioning to be on top. Okay, you can ask a question once I've delivered the context. Once I have, said as the teacher, the authoritarian principle. And again, that could apply to a home environment, that could apply to a work environment. We're talking systematic throughout the societies of the oppressed. You say, you're questioning the love dialogue, discourse, not rejecting it, but questioning it. Should we not first teach the ability to rebel on the path to love and acceptance and all the inclusion and all those wonderful liberal progressive ideas that we have about treating children, including, and But you say something, you say, should we not first teach the ability to rebel? What is questioning? Questioning is an act of the rebel, the essential, the natural. Really, in a way, I even say would be the holy rebel. And if we look at any of our wisdom traditions, especially related to the major religions and their leaders, their prophets, they said question everything in the society. Now, I'm not saying they had the whole understanding of the pedagogy all right, because sometimes they added on some things about, yeah, but pay attention to us and follow us and do not question that. But they did say, question the unholy, question that which is not whole, question, right back to the philosophers in ancients, is that they questioned and questioned, and that's the essential, to me, prophetic, rebellious spirit that is at the core of every human being. That's where I start, children included. And it will be messy sometimes. It will be discomforting when they question, when they say no. So sometimes I think what I'm saying with you, start with no. How much can we include no? Not just diversity, inclusion, identities, but how much can you include the no, the radical no? And it's so interesting that that sounds like and is like the radical no of knowing, of knowledge. So I'm just elaborating a little bit on your first point. Let's move on if you wish, but feel free to comment.
Yeah, actually, I agree with you and with myself, of course. Thank you for quoting me. So I think so. This is the first thing. Secondly, I want to go to the structure of society, adults versus children or childhood.
Yeah, thank you.
We are very progressive for the last decades toward children. I mean, we don't hit them mainly. I mean, we are very polite. We love them. This is, again, your concept of love. We actually very flattering them, sometimes even not justified. I mean, they are genius in computers, etc. But in the main core of education, this is also at some of the homes and mainly in school. School for me is like a temple of learning. I mean, society took education and learning and knowledge and put it into a kind of a church or synagogue or whatever, which is school. And school became a system. It's not a place that we are learning and we are not wisdoming and so on, and not wondering. Now, the play between adults and children is what I call in my last book that is going to be published, and also in the previous school book, not just shadow of adults over the light that is the light that children needs, but also colonialism, which treat children in a colonialistic way. I mean, on the one hand, this is also a dual discourse. We love them, and teachers are loving today the children. They are talking to them, let's say, equally, I mean, in the way that they talk. But in the essence of the words, in the essence of the intentions of education, and teachers are just, missionaries of the curriculum. They are just they are just taking the curriculum into schools, into classes. In the heart of this encounter between teacher and children, and teachers and children's, in the heart of it lies a kind of a colonialism. I mean, you're not ought to ask, you're still candidates for adulthoods. Adulthoods is praised as the wisdom. And I think that philosophy with children, we are not a church, by the way, we're just a philosophical approach, mainly critical, I mean, established by Matthew Lippmann and Anne Margaret Sharp from the United States of America. Actually, philosophers with children like myself and like many others around the world are saying, give children the freedom, the space. I mean, not just the physical space, school and others. This is given to children today. Class is not like it used to be in the 18th or 19th century. It's more lovely, it's more friendly. But again, we are playing with friendliness. It's not actually the heart of the content, the philosophical content. We are actually taking young children in the first grade and putting them in a kind of a prison of concepts. And the concept is, you're a candidate, you're not ought to ask now question, not wonder about the world. We don't have time. We have to go through the curriculum. And the curriculum represents a kind of adulthood, which is predetermined, pre-planned, pre-architectured. And when learning is pre-planned, as you know, it doesn't give any place to freedom of thoughts. Now, we are afraid of children. Children are the first one to say to parents, you are lying. For example, I will give you a little example that I spoke with my students yesterday. When a child is going to sleep and he looks, I love it. I mean, even a baby, not a baby, but a little child, and he sees his mother and he's going to ask her, Mommy, you are not going to be with me all the time. I mean, he or she actually understands that his mother is to die at some point.
Oh, yeah.
And parents are still holding the lie and say, no, I'm going to be with you the rest of your life, which is, and the child knows that his mother or father is lying. I mean, this is existential. This little question, which is a huge question,
Arie,
is a
they know. You say they know, and I agree at some level they know. And I also want to say at another level, they're also not confident that they know because of the undermining of the relational subversion of the truth. You see what I'm saying? They're so relational that at the same time, they actually are confused. So this is what sets up this, I know, I guess I don't know. I know, I guess I don't know. And so that's like a schizoidal, right? It's like a binding of how will I ever get a reference on truth? It starts at that very early level. So I just wanted to clarify and nuance that they know, and they don't know. Or it's at least a confused knowing, right? Obviously, and rightfully so confused.
And this is actually what we call inquiry. I mean, they are going, it's a kind of a dialectic process.
Right.
They are very young. I mean, but my question is, why are we lying to them? I mean, why do you parents and then and teachers are lying? I mean, psychologically, I understand that you recognize that your children can be confused and sometimes, you know, it's a risky place. I mean, this is a bit risky, especially when you're going to sleep. I mean, there is nightmare and so on. But if you use a question, and we started by not answering but giving space for question, you can answer in a Socratic way and say, what do you think about your question? And most parents won't do it. And this is the biggest mistake. I mean, they are convinced that the children is confused, fearful. Now he's not going to sleep. I mean, just a little metaphor, just a little scene, but this is very representative. And the parents needs to give a decisive, a determined answer, which is a big mistake. I mean, they are not in favor of process. A child goes through a process of discovering the world. And this is colonialism. I mean, we put in a very symbolic violence, I mean, this is very violent, symbolic violence. When we give wrong, on the one hand, wrong answers, a big lie. On the other hand, immediate answers, no need for answers. Give them light time to think about it.
So, symbolic violence, epistemic violence. Other words, the child is not the center of their own knowing, therefore they have to give it up over to some dependent, the adult or the authoritarian of some kind playing that role. I know, I will tell you the truth the way it is. Think of the analogy you just gave with this child and this wonderful query that they brought forward to a parent, how the parent responded. I can just see the exact same when I studied the 9/11 phenomenon in the United States. You have a population that all of a sudden felt the threat of death, rightfully so. Their terror comes up of their own mortality, their nation, all their identities, everything that they might lose. And who comes in to tell them what actually is and what actually happened? And there's no questions needed, just go back shopping. This is the president of the United States at that time. You see, and they want to capture the narrative, the absolute narrative of meaning. And that's why I find it interesting that you say, well, what's the opposite of a pedagogy of fear, Arie? And I read your work and you say it's a pedagogy of meaning.
Yeah.
So,
And search.
Go ahead.
And searching. I mean, what is needed, and schools are frightened of it. I mean, when actually we are advocating using a space that is more open. This is radical. Open for question, opening for multi options of answers that can be sometimes very, very sensitive. But actually, philosophy with children encourage philosophical sensitivity. Look, I was meeting in the last semester, just ended yesterday, group of Arabs and Jews, which are citizens of Israel. This could be a very, it is a political, class. And we are in the middle of a bloody and tragic war for both sides here in Israel and also in Gaza, as you know. So we can fight, but we stayed in an open environment. This is the spirit of my university. But actually, and this is actually a place that people can live. I mean, we can stretch also with little children the options of expression, of opposition. Now, one of the expression that I want to talk about is that teachers are afraid of fightings, physically. This is very much in the States, between children and children. They will fight, they will hurt one another. We are not observing it in Israel, but America is very violent. USA, of course, is violent because of the weapon, and so we have a lot of weapon also, but not in schools. So, and teachers actually think that when children won't agree about something, disagree, they will start fighting. Now, this is actually colonialism of adults, because adults are starting wars, not children. Now, adults that are actually the big fighters, they are the terrorists, not just terror. They hate one another. And then advocating peace education, which is not successful around the world, unfortunately, are accusing children, and this is common, knowledge, that children are very cruel. And I ask you, adults, where do you take it from? I didn't see anywhere around the world children that are cruel. They can be sometimes, very problematic. They move, they think, they move with their head. Now, when you go into class and you don't encourage open discussion, philosophical discussion, not discussion about the material to the test. This is obvious and very banal, okay? You're actually afraid that they will fight. Now, democracy is based on disagreements. Disagreements. If you take adults and put adulthood in the classroom, fear, and you fear that they will take disagreement into fighting, you are very wrong. Disagreement should be in the heart of the discussion, the dialogue in classes, in education, in society. This is what happens in the USA and also, unfortunately, in my country, and also in France, in other places, in Germany today. We have to live with disagreements. This is actually philosophical, a space of improvisation, of fertile ideas, of imaginative and innovative thinking, what we call creative thinking in philosophy with children. Now, schools are talking the language in the declarative. As you remember, I try to define two kinds of discourse that are playing together in a kind of a cheating game in this prison of concept, which is school. On the one hand, schools are talking around and speaking in favor of disagreements and dialogue and democracy and so on. On the other hand, when it comes to the practice discourse, where are you going with the test, with the assessment, with the policy? with the assessment of the teachers, with the dialogue with the parents, they are very afraid. So they use still schools are and pupils are treated as prisoners, not physically. And this is misleading because we don't hit children today. So we are not violent, but we are closing their minds. So we are very violent towards them.
Colonization, another word. I think of Bell Hooks, the great critical Black feminist in the United States, educator. Colonizing starts in the mind. We have to decolonize our minds. And what you and I think, are adding the piece, well, that's fine. And that's where the philosophical can come in. Here's the challenge for the philosophical people and the philosophical mind and the philosophical therapia, actually, in a way that you are offering, is what I see in your work and in mine, is that, but this fear stuff, and it's just all about emotions and feelings. And so philosophers, they may want to look at anxiety, and they have. You were saying, the psychology department will look at anxiety a little bit and, fears, maybe phobias and, stuff like that. But they really cannot get a handle on, in my experience, both the philosophers in general as a camp and the discipline and the structuring of the psychology, etc. And now the new neurobiological domain, which has really absorbed so much of trying to understand, well, this is how we understand human behavior. We now have the brain scans, and so that's what's going on. And I go, that's like a symptom of what's going on. You could argue that's not the thing going on. What that is a photograph, but what's going on phenomenologically. And you and I are saying we have to get into the deep political, cultural, historical phenomenology of the operations of a fear discourse, is the way I like to sometimes say it. It's a discoursing of fear. And I like to use Foucault for that, but if you don't want that sophisticated, it's fear patterning. And I say, well, let's look at fear patterning, fear itself, and not spend so much time on the fears, X, Y, Z to 360 types of fears or phobias. That's so distractive. Again, away from this political core, this ideological core of investigation and query that you're trying to get at. And I think that's where we do the same thing, with childhood. We're looking at behaviors, right? And so we're so much into cognitive behaviorism and the psychology of how children behave, but we're not actually, well, what are children actually working through ideologically, philosophically and ideologically? What are children working through from the moment that they're born? And you get a book like this, which I know you've seen. And it's a great book and written fairly popularly for a lot of people to read. I highly recommend it for all kinds of people in early childhood education and so on, where I work at a daycare part-time. And that idea that this person argues from an evolutionary perspective, and she's a philosopher as well as she has the background in cognitive behavior science. So she's also a philosopher. It's a really nice, Alison Gopnik. And really, I summarize and think of the way that book, its basic premise is childhood, evolutionarily, is actually its own ecosystem. And it's meant to be protected from entering the adult world as much and as long as possible. Why?
Yeah.
Because childhood has evolved with a whole set of philosophical capabilities, and there's research on this. They're testing and looking at how children do philosophical work, inquiry, questioning, make assumptions, counterfactuals, etc. And that work they're doing, because of the wonderful, I guess, freedom that a child has. They don't have to go to work. They don't have to be the adult paying the rent. They don't have to operate and pay taxes. There's a lot of freedom for that play space. So we could call it, there's where the open mind is. There's where the playful, creative, innovative, eternal innovator and improviser is in our being as a human species. Let's keep that childhood sacred It's not to overly romanticize it, because they're going to have all the difficulties that their parents are having at some level. It all comes on them. They are colonized. And what you're asking, and I guess I'm asking, is a much more attentive to even being aware there is something called colonizing of adults, or the shadow casting upon children. And I know, my work in my dissertation, I called it adultism. That fearism plus adultism, and I'm glad you cited that in your book, this one here, that you saw that combination, and I agree totally, because adults are going to be the transmitters of the system of oppression. They cannot not be at some level, but how conscious you are of that, how you can reconcile that, right? Try to modify it. And I think what you're saying is through philosophy and a philosophical analysis to childhood development is very different than a psychology of child development. I'm not saying they don't overlap, and I don't think you're saying they don't overlap, but you're saying we have a huge amount of books on the psychology of child development. And where is the philosophy of child development? It's pretty minor, but thanks to your movements that you're part of, philosophy for and with children, and that's at least an attempt. And again, I also do work with, parenting education, and try to bring some of that awareness of you really are in many ways, and it's not your fault that you're colonizing. You're a part of the system that is colonizing, right? It's just like we're all oppressed. We're all more or less, to use Freire's idea, even the oppressors are oppressed. And
I want to add another dimension, which is very important. Look at technology. We thought technology actually replaced some of the churches. When in the past, we expected that children will become believers, and then, of course, servants of God. I mean, God in the broadest sense. Now, today, technology became the new church. When you talk about success, advancement, progress, and so on, it always goes with technology. Now, again, technology is very important, of course, and I'm not against technology. I like technology and so on, but I'm talking about little children and technology. This is a way of taking children from the path of thinking freely, independently, innovatively, and so on, and putting them in an era that will actually encourage them to be stupid, to be addicted in some ways, and not develop. It's actually taking them from the path of thinking into a kind of a lie, that when you will use technology, think technologically, not philosophically, think technologically, you will become something. I mean, in the past, God will love you and will promise you whatever, heaven or whatever. Today, you will become successful. You will become the next whatever the figure is in America, Elon Musk or others, you will do millions. So, and this is again, the colonialism of adults saying to children, don't mess with questions. Questions won't offer you money, won't offer you dollars. If you want to invest in yourself, put yourself in the domain of technology. And schools actually are running towards it. The second dimension, which is quite new, as you know, is the fear from AI. Again, the fear of something that we actually can be a resource. Always adults are talking in the name of something risky. It's like no child left behind. Education, always politicians use some kind of dimension of risk towards teachers and students in order to discipline school. In my view, not discipline school, discipline the questions inside the school. and actually to recruit children not to think independently. And I put a lot of emphasis, and I like very much the writing of Alison Gopnik, as you mentioned. By the way, she's a great, or even, the #1 psychologist of early childhood today.
Oh, yeah.
Her background is philosophy.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah.
I'm not surprised that she's coming from it. And most of her writing that summarize her huge corpus of actually empirical studies that proves that children, which you can watch the movies and the films, the lovely movies on her website.
Oh, okay.
Proves again that children knows to ask questions, are better in asking some of even the scientific question, but of course, that they are not afraid if you're not instill into them the fear. And actually, the book that you said, and this philosophical baby, but by the way, just a joke, in Hebrew it was translated into the thinking baby.
Oh,
because
interesting.
philosophical won't sell it. I mean, you see?
Oh,
This
yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
thinking about it.
Much
The
more
book,
marketable.
yes, that's it. Thinking is acceptable, but not philosophy. I mean, this is
Exactly.
just a joke, but it's actually, this is the way that it was translated. So,
Philosophy is a dirty word.
yes, it's very dangerous.
It's dangerous.
Yes, it's dangerous.
But
Or dangerous can be not effective. I mean, actually, I can give you another example, which is very, very funny. A few years ago, one of the colleges here actually published itself by putting in an advertising saying philosophy is dying and the funeral will take place in this and this day. So don't put yourself into humanistic thinking. Come into computer, law, money, finance, and so on. And today, of course, the big God is technology. Don't invest yourself into thinking this will take you to hell. You won't do money. And parents are the agents, the big agents of this big lie. I mean, our viewers should know that you and I like technology. We are not technology phobic, not at all, okay? But we are talking about the phase that thinking or free thinking is developed, which is young children. And this is a space that should be free of nonsense that will take children from free thinking into making money or promising them other successes. And during the centuries, the successes was different.
yep, so free of nonsense. I'm just quoting you. I know you're frustrated at times and passionate, and I get that way too. And I think what we can basically rephrase that. This nonsense really, what at some level you're talking about is the impact of fear. I want to go into this a little bit more because it is a fear talk today. Is how you've come to understand this impact of fear on intelligence, because I think that's, if your fear of people being nonsense or etc., it's really, you're saying they're fear-based. They are coming from a place where the fear is operating and their highest intelligence is not working. So psychology more or less knows that. I mean, there's a lot of work out there showing those are the more primal parts of our brain that are more defense intelligence, is not necessarily our highest cognitive, functioning parts of our brain. And so when we use fear, or people are in a traumatic state of re-triggered or whatever, post-traumatic, those parts of the brain will kind of take over. And we use, in philosophy, is traditionally called that the irrational, more or less, and the lower passions, right, which are lesser than the reason, and so on. So I think, unfortunately, philosophy has got itself in a bit of a mess because it's hierarchized and colonized, I think, overly through using this rational reason. So I'm talking Western Enlightenment particularly. I'm not a philosopher of the pre. I don't know that much about the history of the early philosophers. I know enough to know, though, generally, that has been a long trend of a lot of male thinkers purporting and using those kinds of modes, right? Where reason is the highest and everything else is basically. However, that becomes really problematic for me. So the fear question is, no wonder they don't see fear as all that important. Because haven't got it in its hierarchy as important. They have what's higher is the higher cognitive functioning. And so it's just not a priority, right? It's just not valued to put all the attention on it, other than it's a bit annoying and see if you can, the stoical kind of approach of philosophy is just overcome it, suppress it by will, and rechange, whatever your mind thinking is and, get real. Well, I think you and I are basically saying, yeah, but fear is very real. And it not only is real, it is probably a higher motivator than any reason or rational capability up here is to actually actualize. And an operational system it has some rational cognitive structuring to that system, right? Of policies, rules, regulations, evaluation methods. But when you get underneath it all, the phenomenon is we're all operating on the fear of not achieving, not living up to, not being seen within the eyes of the big system, which says, yes, we are going to be rational human beings and we are going to make our decisions, and that's how our ethics is going to be formed by. And I think what the challenge is, I don't know if you've thought about this one, and I think Gur-Ze'ev is one of your mentors, Ilan Gur-Ze'ev, the philosopher educator. He's really saying we're not as rational as we think we are, number one, and we don't have the stability of the rational. There is no stability even in how we live if you actually look at how most of us live. And this is where he gets to his diasporic philosophy in a nutshell. But we are much more insecure and we're much more becoming than being, than locating, than having the promised land, and so on. I really like that as a hugely important philosophy, no doubt has influenced you. You were one of his graduate students. So it kind of comes down to, can you tell me why you want to go around preaching revoke fear now? That's the t-shirt I'm going to make for you. Revoke fear now, because I heard it in one of your talks, we need to be revoking fear. And then I thought, yeah, okay, I'm making a joke of it. But it's more complicated, isn't it, to think about fear? So as a philosopher, as an educator, can you tweeze that apart? Are you going around just saying revoke fear and everything will be okay?
No, because I don't want to be a church. One of the things that when you want to get away from dogma or dogmatic thinking, you don't have to preach for something. You have to advocate for approaches and not a kind of a new fashion. One of the problems in education is that we are moving from one fashion to another, or from one prophet to another, from one reform to another. This is in the United States and also around the world. I mean, no child left behind or whatever, the neoliberalism will take you. We are approaching, and usually people are making money of it. It's coming again to politics or money, which is the same. One of the things that I'm advocating towards my students is going back to the basic pedagogy of free development of thinking. Thinking is, there is a certain age that it's a critical point that you can develop a child, or a child can develop itself to think freely by going back to existential questions. They are asking them differently than adults. Now, all the theories of development, Piaget and others, all the great philosophers, most of them, not most of them, all of them were adults. Now we are importing characteristic of adulthood massively towards childhood. And if you read Alison Gopnik well, you can see in her writing, and I recommend to all our viewers to read her writing, dozens of articles and of course her great books, advocating that childhood and adulthood are different in many dimensions and many aspects. Now, it's not enough to know it. We need now action to free children from the colonialism. It's actually an educational, academic, parents' colonialism. And we have to acknowledge that there is a certain years in the life of the child, which is critical in order that he or she will develop his own or her own way of asking questions. This is not dangerous. Don't be afraid of it. I ask you, adults, don't be afraid. On the one hand, don't over-activate them. On the other, I mean by technology or extra enriching, courses or preparation for school and so on. Going back to natural thinking. Now the problem is that children, adults, I understand, think that children are confused when they ask questions. They are not sure, they are insecure. Therefore, they are risky. Or this is a risky space. I can understand it as a parent. I have 3 adults, boys, but I can understand it. I mean, it's like you're afraid that they will jump to the road filled of cars. But I'm telling to my children, to myself, and to you and to our viewers, thinking is not a dangerous place. It can be. Even Nietzsche said that when you dig too much, you can end, becoming crazy. And he knew something about craziness, okay? But not in the way that children are digging into questions. Now, and if you talk about educational progress or economical progress of our countries, we can achieve a lot of it because then children can become very creative. I know that it's a kind of selling philosophy with children. This is not what I mean. I say politics can be better this way because many good thinkers can become politicians and not just lazy politicians and so on. And I think that some of even the places that are like Israel and Ukraine and other places that are very conflictual and are very bloody and tragic, I suggest that we will give children the opportunity to give us peace. I know that I sound a bit optimistic or utopic, but I guess that if we will give children the option to solve, I mean, just optional, some of the problems of the world, they will offer very creative thinking because they are going back to the naivety of mankind. I mean, the naivety is not marking groups, stereotyping people, and making afraid of one group against the other. MAGA, Make America Great Against the liberals. Here in Israel, liberals and conservatives. In Germany, others and so on. All the questions that Levinas and Buber's, the big Jewish philosophers of dialogue, dealt with, in the beginning of the 20th centuries. What is humanity? And children are not danger to one another. They are not violence. They can be very creative. Now, when you take my last sentences and give them to adults, they will say, oh, he is very naive. This is a philosophical junk from the university. Our university is on the top of the mountain, so it's very easy.
I know it is, yeah.
Make joke on us. We are physically, up.
I know, yeah.
Although we are very close, but And this is what usually people are saying. Be realistic. I mean, realistic is be afraid of one another, fight one another, and so on. Now, I think I have an article about from philosophy with children to social activism. And I see philosophy with children based on Matthew Lipman's writing, by the way.
Okay.
I'm not sure he would agree with me, but I took some of his ideas on democracy, on social justice, and claim that that philosophy with children, I mean, free space of community of inquiry and thinkers, can be a laboratory of young children towards activism in adulthood. So we need to give this path of education a chance if we will get rid of the fear.
Yep.
Pedagogy.
So yeah, you're not into overprotecting children in unnecessary ways. And this is kind of a philosophy, right? When you have scared adults around children, they're going to want to overprotect them generally. They mess up sometimes and don't protect them at all in that confusion, but there's a tendency to overprotect them because the adult does not feel secure. And so the children's getting all of that insecurity from the adult world poured onto them, and again, exacerbates their own challenges of what they have to face existentially as they're trying to figure out how the world works, how to make meaning in the world. So we're not advocating here the fragility of children in a certain way. It's like sensitivity is not the same as fragility. And I think you're also saying that developing an autonomous way of thinking, I'm just paraphrasing you here, is not the same as an autonomy to do whatever they want to do behaviorally. It's like, but there is an autonomy of ways of thinking and how to nourish that. So I think some people, they confuse the two, conflate thinking with behavior. And then they think a child autonomous in their thinking will misbehave, not be cooperative, may even do worse because they're free to do whatever they want. So here's where the whole conservative backlash has come against progressivism, right? From John Dewey forward and so on within education, Rousseau forward, going way back. There's been this huge backlash and it continues and it's getting very severe with great big movements, right, of anti-wokeism, anti-awarenessism. Let's go back to the way it was, make America great again. These are all connecting in a huge conservative backlash, and then countries like Israel or other countries who are moving to the right more and more and reconfirming this very very rigid understanding of the way we will get stability. And of course, everything we see is when it's fear-based stability, it crumbles and it's a prison for themselves. They will stop thinking well, and they're dangerous because they've got their fingers on buttons that produce nuclear arms to take off. So we're in a very dangerous time. However, you seem through all of that, and you have your own young children, do you think children are still very capable, or do you think they're starting to lose some of the resilience because of all these impingements of accumulated colonialization of pedagogies of fear? Some people are saying the children are really suffering. Look at the statistics, right? Mental health. And how do you kind of come out in all of that and come around to a philosophical understanding, right?
One of the challenges that I think that Matthew Lipman and Anne Margaret Sharp, our father and mother founder of philosophy with children, didn't handle is social media. I mean, at the time, there was no social media.
Right.
Now, social media is a new player that actually changed the mind of all of us, the social structure, the fight between groups, and so on. There are a lot of writing around it. Now, this is the thing that this is the major thing is that we ought to give in certain age that children are not addicted yet to social media. We should give them opportunity to philosophize.
Mm-hmm.
And school are very critical this is a critical place. I mean, the first and the second grade should be free for many disciplines and taking back philosophy with children inside of them in order to give space, because later children are quite structured into groups. This is my new book. My new book is actually claiming that children is structured by narratives and identities, identity and gender and politics of identities, and so that's it. This is going to be published next week. So, and I actually analyze that we should know that identity and narrative and the thing that they are bringing into the community of inquiry is not dangerous. It's different. It's changing the mindset of the community. I mean, when a child is coming from a gay family, and now the gays, I mean, the community of gays are quite free, most of the Western, and he or she will bring questions from gay perspective. This can be very enriching to the community of inquiry. This is not threatening. It can be very enriching also that others will know that there are gays and so on, or Black families, or single mothers, or whatever.
And I think you brought that book out, Arie, sorry to interrupt, but you brought that book out because I think you found that the literature on philosophy with children, and its history of some decades, it was kind of missing some of that cultural, political referencing and identity. So you seem to be someone who's been at the forefront of bringing that out with your new book. Congratulations. I guess that's coming out soon. We have to wrap up here, but let's just think of where we want to end with a few statements. I'm going to let you just take it away. What is it you'd like to sort of wrap up with here, Arie? How is this for you today, by the way, as a conversation as well?
Yes. So first of all, Michael, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm not just polite. We had many conversations before. It was very fascinating and enlightening for me and enriching. So this conversation also is very enriching. Hopefully, we will write together our book on pedagogy of fear. And we will offer a kind of analyze that is broader than this conversation.
Yes, indeed.
First of all, this is so thank you very much for the opportunity. I want that we will spread hope. I mean, I just talked with some of my colleagues this morning. We are in the middle of a bloody war, and I said, let's talk about hope. And I think that children, there are three. Just ending sentence, there are three C's that are developed in community of inquiry with children. Critical, creative, but also caring. And we didn't
say the last one again.
Caring.
Yes.
But not in the way that Nell Nodding speaks about it.
Right.
But differently. I mean, caring thinking, which is very, very essential for the dialogue between children and children, and also adults and children. So I think that if we philosophize and then in the end we develop caring thinking, this can be very, let's end with it. I mean, let's be very, I mean, I'm optimistic and I hope that you are also. And let's hope for the best.
Okay, well, that's a whole other conversation. We never got into our deep conversation on love. We never got into a deep conversation on hope. We didn't get into a deep conversation on free and thinking freely. These just off the top for me, that's my big part of my takeaway. Of course, I gained lots in other ways from listening to you today, but I kept noting, yeah, those are really complex, and fear, even going deeper into what fear is, what love is, how love is related to fear. Conflict, that came up for me. I did my master's on conflict pedagogy. I troubled the entire conversation of conflict, and I came up pretty much with, in simple terms, that what you did is that our fear of conflict is a deadly combination that brings us into not being able to deal with domination well. So in other words, domination will find all kinds of ways to purvey itself if we do not know how to do conflict well. And conflict resolution and conflict management education is just as bad as peace education that Ilan Gur-Ze'ev takes apart piece by piece by piece. And I'm just cheering, I'm cheering, I'm cheering. And that was my complaint way back in 1998 is all this energy on peace education, hardly anybody's writing about conflict education. And
Yeah.
today I would say hardly anybody wants to talk about fear education. And how is fear education different than pedagogy of fear as you use it and so on and others? Those are the kind of interesting things, Arie, I think we will have in our next book when we finally get together. Thanks very much for today and all the
Thank
best to you and your family, etc.
you very much. See you soon.
Bye-bye.